Picture this, if you will. You're on stage at your local jam session. Someone calls, "What is this thing called love?" It's your solo, and the pianist plays this chord. A dominant 7 flat 9 to be sure. Now you could play this. But wouldn't you rather play this? You're on stage at a beautiful theater accompanying a singer that you've never played with before. They call "Spring is Here." The first chord is fully diminished. Now you could play this. But wouldn't you rather play this? You're subbing at the Village Vanguard for Christy McBride's Inside Straight. They call "Stella by Starlight," a song whose first chord is infamously an E half diminished. There's only one problem.
You don't know what to play on an E half diminished.
No worries, my friend. We have a solution. For your consideration, Bob DeBoo.
Hey, what's up everybody? Bob DeBoo here for Open Studio. Today we're going to talk about 3 unique sounds that all revolve around the term diminished. So let's get into it. Welcome to What the Diminished. Great, let's get into it. We have 3 sounds to discover here. We're going to start with the dominant 7th flat 9. I'll show you a little hack that goes along with that, but this is pretty fun. Here is the sound that we're trying to associate with here. So this is a C13 flat 9 type of sound. If you're ever looking at a chord symbol and you see a flat 13, this is not the sound you're looking for. But if it's got a natural 13 in it, you're good. So here's the idea. Play the C dominant arpeggio. So play C, E, G, and B flat. That, of course, spells the chord very clearly. It's the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th, and I'm pretty sure most everybody has practiced that arpeggio, and of course do that in different inversions as well, too. The quick and dirty way to think about the half-whole diminished scale, though, is to change your goalposts. Think about changing C into D flat. That's the only one actually that you have to change, which is really nice, and that's why this works really well, is that you already know all these, the roots, 3rds, 5ths, and 7ths, but if you change the root into the flat 9, into D flat, then you can do this. Play a half step below each of these new quote-unquote goalposts, right? So C in the D flat. Now our next chord tone is E, our next goalpost is E. Play a half step into that. Half step into the 5th, which is G. Half step into the 7th, which is B flat, so A into B flat. Now you've got that half-whole diminished scale. So what's interesting about the half-whole diminished scale is that the title imparts the structure. It's built of a half step and then a whole step, half step, whole step, etc., right, until you get to the next octave. But if you're thinking about it in those terms, the chord's going to be over before you can actually play anything, right? So don't practice it while you're thinking half step, whole step, half step, whole step. You can see that, of course, and do it slow, but instead think about it from these goalposts, and then you can start anywhere inside of the scale. For instance, if I'm maybe wanting to start from the 3rd, right? I'm thinking C7 flat 9, but I was starting from the 3rd. Half step into the 3rd, flat 9, 7th, 5th, 3rd, etc., right? And that makes it a little bit easier for me to think about. Cool? Another interesting idea with that is that if you take a half step below each of those goalposts or chord tones, and remember our new chord tone instead of the root is the flat 9, or that D flat. If you play a major triad from each of those approach notes, so C would be our approach note in a D flat, play a C major triad. Play a C7th arpeggio. All of those notes are in that scale that we just played, right? But it's from the root, so we want to think about doing that, moving that up a little bit higher. But the hack was, we're thinking a half step below that goalpost, right? So you can do the same thing, a half step below the 3rd, which is from E is the 3rd, but E flat is that half step below it. So play an E flat dominant 7th arpeggio now. Well, that gets you the sharp 9, the 5th, the 7th, and the flat 9 without using too much brain power, hopefully, which I'm a big fan of. And you start to mix and match them along with the idea of the scale being a half step, below each of these chord tones or whatever, and you've got some more fodder that you can solo with and get creative with. Okay, so we've got the C major 7th or the C dominant 7th arpeggio, E7, E flat 7th arpeggio. Half step below the 5th would be F sharp. All of those notes are still relevant inside of the half whole diminished scale. F sharp, flat 5, or sharp 11, however you want to think about it. Dominant 7th, flat 9, and then F flat is the enharmonic E, so that's the 3rd, right? The last one we want to deal with is a half step into the 7th. The 7th in C7 flat 9 is B flat, right? So we're feeling that. This is the 7th. So play the A 7th arpeggio. And you can always borrow from these other arpeggios too. It sounds really hip and it's really easy to think about. So C7, E flat 7, G flat or F sharp 7, and A7. So now we have 4 major triads, and you've all practiced your major triads and dominant 7th arpeggios a bunch, I'm sure. So now you just need to think about where you can fit them in. Half step below the flat 9, half step below the 3rd, half step below the 5th, half step below the 7th. And you've got it. So all of that will fit over that C7 flat 9 chord. Let's move on to our next sound, the fully diminished sound. It's different. It has a different character and it functions much differently inside of harmony as we're playing through changes and stuff like that, right? It comes up a little bit less perhaps than the dominant 7th flat 9 chord, but it doesn't mean that we can't know about it and understand it. So technically it's built the same way, except we're starting on a different place. On the fully diminished chord, we want to play a whole half diminished scale, meaning C, whole step up to D, half step to E flat, etc., whole halves, and again, if you're thinking of it from these terms, the chord is going to be gone before you can actually play anything interesting, right? So we do need to practice it, of course, but there's some other hacks here too. From each of these chord tones on the C diminished arpeggio, which is C, E flat, F sharp, and A, right? You can play the first 4 notes of the minor scale of each of those. So C minor, just the first 4 notes, C, D, E flat, and F. Does that fit? It does. Cool. You can do the same thing from the 3rd now, from E flat. Ah, cool. So if I mix and match those, then I can get some lines in there, and I'm not thinking the scale so much. I'm really just thinking those goalposts, C, E flat. Let's do the same thing to the next chord tone, which is F sharp. There's our chord again, right? First 4 notes of the F sharp minor scale. So F sharp, G sharp, A, and B. Right? All of that fits in there, and I'm not thinking whole, half, anything. I'm thinking from each of these goalposts, right? Great. There's one more, of course, and you probably already guessed it, from A. So we've got C, E flat, G flat, or F sharp to A. Do the same thing. Play the first 4 notes of the A minor scale, and you've got some information that's going to sound good over that fully diminished chord. So once again, C, E flat, F sharp, A. And then you're back to C again. That's all moving up in minor thirds, right? So anything that you play inside of those first 4 notes of those minor scales, you can move it around, and it's going to sound organized and help you with your building of solos or building your lines. And it all fits in there. Let's move on to the last sound, which is the half diminished sound. Very often when I ask people, what scale do you play over the half diminished chord? I'll hear half whole diminished scale, right? I mean, I hear the term has half diminished in the chord. Shouldn't I play the half diminished scale? No, no way. So the half diminished chord, C, E flat, G flat, and B flat, if we're in the key of C, right? Or the chord of the moment is C. C half diminished, right? So this, you want to think about, this is really easy. You just think a half step above the root. Our root is C. So what's a half step above C? D flat. You want to play the D flat major scale, but starting on C. The more verbose way to call that is to say the C Locrian scale, right? But if I say Locrian, then I have to go explain all of that, right? Oh, excuse me, wrong chord. The half diminished, C, but I'm going to play the D flat major scale. And it'll fit. It's really nice, right? So whatever you know how to do, whatever you're comfortable playing over the D flat major scale, you can put that right in there. Just think a half step above the root and you're good. The next most common scale that people will put on that half diminished chord is just to raise that D flat up to a D and make it the Locrian sharp 2 scale. This is also E flat melodic minor, but that's another story. We want to use as little brain power as possible so we can play stuff and have fun immediately. So there I'm thinking a D natural instead of D flat, and it's just got a different color to it. Great. That's it. So dominant 7th flat 9, half whole diminished scale, think your arpeggios, and then raise that root by a half step, and you're good. That gets you a diminished arpeggio, by the way, right? Fully diminished, play the whole half diminished scale. Maybe you can think the first 4 notes of minor scale from each of those chord tones or goalposts, right? And then on the half diminished chord, just think a half step up from the root and play the major scale. Or you can raise that to the sharp 2, the Locrian sharp 2. Well, that's it. This has been so much fun. Thanks for joining me. My name again is Bob DeBoo.
And if Bob diminished your diminished problems, why not hit the like button? If this is your first time in our zone, go ahead and subscribe. Until next time, happy practicing.
Hey, cool. That's cute.